Well, I hope you all found these students as inspirational as we did. I think their teachers clearly played a huge role, as did their parents, in their lives. So cheers to all of you all. I am very honored to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Richard Brettell, an internationally respected art historian, curator, and educator. Dr. Brettell is one of the world's foremost authorities on Impressionism and French painting. With 3 degrees from Yale, he has taught at UT Austin, Northwestern, the University of Chicago, Yale, and Harvard. He is currently the McDermott Distinguished Chair in Interdisciplinary Program in Arts and Humanities at UT Dallas and the founding director of the new Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History. Last May, UT Dallas received a landmark gift of $17 million from Mrs. O'Donnell to create an art institute of the future. It will be housed at UT Dallas and the Dallas Museum of Art and link new technology, the sciences, and the arts. When the gift was announced, Rick said, "Mrs. O'Donnell has made it clear that what interested her about funding art history at UT Dallas was our strength in the sciences, technology, and management, thus creating the conditions that could foster a wholly new kind of art history. With art historians on campus who study the intersections between art and cartography, art and biology, and art history in the context of big data, UT Dallas has demonstrated a willingness to think about art and art history in new ways." In January, D Magazine's arts editor, Peter Semick, posted 5 Dallas arts resolutions and predictions for 2015, one of which was, quote, "increased investment in Dallas's intellectual capital. After learning more about the depth of funding and plans for the O'Donnell Institute, it seems primed to not only deepen and expand the quantity and quality of art historical research taking place in our fair burg, but to help enrich intellectual life in Dallas at large," end quote. The idea is to promote scholarship and research and to use the Institute to bridge the university and the museum. Dr. Brettell's lifelong experience working in museums and universities is one of the many reasons he is an outstanding founding director. His museum career began in 1980 as a curator of European painting at the Art Institute of Chicago. 8 years later, he became the McDermott director at the Dallas Museum of Art, where he helped raise $55 million and completed the Hammond Building, which opened in 1993. He's an international museum consultant, a prolific author. More than a decade ago, he established and is the director of the Center for the Interdisciplinary Study of Museums at UT Dallas. He is the director of the Paul Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné for the Wildenstein Institute in Paris, and was recently named Commander of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French Minister of Culture for his work with the French Regional American Museum Exchange. He has written many books, most recently what's been called the definitive portrait of Camille Pissarro, Pissarro's People, written in fall 2010 in conjunction with a major exhibition organized and curated by Dr. Brettell at the Clark Institute at Williamstown. In 2013, he became the art critic for the Dallas Morning News. He has recorded 3 history of art courses for the teaching company and directs a professional travel company, the Brettell Seminars. I don't know when he sleeps either. Dr. Brettell has also advised the State Department, lectures at museums and universities throughout the world, and serves on boards of many national cultural organizations. Please bear in mind, I am just hitting the high points of his career. So join me in welcoming one of Dallas's great natural resources, Dr. Richard Brettell.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. What's interesting is, of course, I direct research at the top end when all of you people have come through and you'll have majored in other things and you'll come and you'll do research with us. But of course, it all begins at the beginning. And I wanted to begin and end with a book, which was my favorite book as a child. You know, there was Dick and Jane, and there are all those horrible books we have, but this was my favorite book when I was 5 years old. And it's a great art history book because it has no text. It only has photographs and identifies them, and I was riveted by it as a little child growing up in Wyoming and Colorado. and these shots of the Forum Romanum and paintings by people named Giotto and Raphael, and the Pieta School, and even buildings in the United States. These things were part of my visual vocabulary by the time I was 6 and 7 years old because of this book, which was my mother's book. Here is her name, Ellen Louise Sackett, Delta, Delta, Delta. That tells you what was important at the University of Wyoming in 1947. And it sort of, what is fascinating is that she majored in home economics because that was what women majored in those days. But she was fascinated by art history. And as a mother, she exposed all of us not only to the visual arts, but to music. In fact, my most important teacher in my life was my piano teacher when I was a young kid. And when I went to Yale in 1967, I went to major in molecular biophysics. And I was hell-bent in doing molecular biophysics, but I had decided not to go to Juilliard because I didn't want to be with music geeks. And then when I got to Yale, I met an art historian named George Kubler, who had a long discussion with me about the great chemist and physicist Niels Bohr, the Danish Nobel Prize winner from early in the 20th century. And I thought, how can an art historian talk to me about science? And the conversation was so interesting that within 2 years, I'd switched my major from molecular biophysics to philosophy to English to art history. And so by the time I entered my junior year, I was majoring in the thing that you would have thought I would have majored in from the beginning because of this book. And now I have the honor and privilege of directing a new research institute in art history. And what's fascinating is that it's a research institute in art history at a university in Texas, which is much more like MIT than it is like Williams or Harvard or Yale or SMU. And Mrs. O'Donnell, when she spoke to me about this, wanted us to do something she called art history UTD style. And there are reasons for this. Art history, like all humanistic disciplines, is completely dependent upon technology. It was begun because of photography. Without photography, there would not be advanced art history because we couldn't have this. We couldn't compare things. And of course, now we live in a new age. We're beyond the photographic age, we're beyond the film age, and we're in the digital age. And that means our access to images and the way that images permeate our lives is completely different than it was when I was a child in the 1960s. And that means you have to think differently about even the arts. So it's not just the arts and the sciences, it's the way in which each of them are affected by technology, by shifts in the human imagination, and inventing a new program in the history of art in a university which never had even an art history department is something which is incredibly challenging and exciting. And I think what it'll do, thanks to Mrs. O'Donnell, is create a situation in which people like you or your successors in several years will even actually think about coming to UTD, in addition to thinking about going to the colleges that you're going to. Now, when I was very young, I think about 6, and my sister was, my next sister was 4, we were taken to take a test, a little sort of early to take a test. But it's a test that has made me think a lot about not only testing, but also about music and the way in which music invades our consciousness and our mind. And it was called the Seashore Music Ability Test. I don't know how many of you have heard of this test. Some of you have. And I took it when I was a little boy. And the great thing about this test is you don't have to know any music. You don't have to be able to read even. What it is a series of notes that are played to you, and then they're played to you again. And you're asked to tell them whether the second playing is the same or different than the first. And it starts with 3 notes, then 5 notes, then 7 notes, then 15 notes, then 22 notes, then 35 notes. And it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. And I got an incredibly high score, and my sister got an incredibly low score. And she went on to become a concert pianist, and I went on to become an art historian. So you can see what happens. But what I learned from it, and what I learned from this, is that what the arts also introduce into the human mind is the importance of memory. And we learned about each of you how curious you are and how much you want to learn new things. And that's because you file away what you've already learned into a well-ordered mind. And it is the action of memory that creates civilization. And that creation of civilization is really what links the sciences and the arts. And I hope fervently that due to the incredible creativity and persistence of Edith O'Donnell, that the sciences and the arts, the sciences of Peter O'Donnell and the arts of Edith O'Donnell will really unite as they have, and as I hope they will in all of your future careers. Thank you.